The slap of plastic on metal echoed as Victoria yanked the oxygen tube from Elijah's face. Blood beaded instantly beneath his nose. "It's not permitted equipment," she snapped, holding the tube like a trophy. His chest heaved, each breath weaker than the last. "He can't breathe," Dr. Terence Reynolds shouted, flashing his medical ID. The cabin froze, phones lifted, passengers gasped. But no one moved. A surgeon's authority meant nothing at 30,000 feet, not against a flight attendant's prejudice. What she didn't know, what the world would soon learn, was that her single act of arrogance would ignite a legal firestorm that would shake the entire airline industry to its knees. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more true stories about justice prevailing against discrimination. How would you react if you witnessed a flight attendant endangering a passenger's life by removing vital medical equipment? Let's find out what happened next in this unbelievable true story that changed airline practices forever. The morning had started with such promise. Dr. Terence Reynolds, one of Chicago's most respected cardiothoracic surgeons at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, carefully packed the last of his son's medical supplies into their carry-on luggage. He double-checked the portable oxygen concentrator, ensuring it was fully charged for their 4-hour flight to San Francisco. "Elijah, you got all your documentation?" Terence called out, his voice echoing through their spacious lakeside home. 16-year-old Elijah Reynolds appeared in the doorway, a folder clutched in his slender hands. Despite the nasal cannula delivering supplemental oxygen through clear tubing, Elijah's bright eyes and quick smile revealed his excitement. "Got everything, Dad, all the doctor's notes, the FAA approval forms, and even that letter from Dr. Martinez explaining why I need it after the pulmonary fibrosis diagnosis." Terence nodded approvingly. Just 4 months ago, Elijah had been diagnosed with a rare form of pulmonary fibrosis following complications from pneumonia. The condition had been serious but treatable. His recovery required supplemental oxygen, especially during air travel when cabin pressure could exacerbate his breathing difficulties. "Perfect. This is going to be an amazing opportunity," Terence said, zipping the final bag. "The Stanford Summer Science Program only accepts 50 students nationwide." "You earned this," Elijah adjusted his cannula self-consciously. "I just hope I don't stand out too much." "You'll stand out because you're brilliant," Terence replied, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Not because of this temporary equipment." Monica Reynolds, Terence's wife and a prominent civil rights attorney, entered the room with a travel mug of coffee. Her elegant pantsuit and briefcase indicated she was heading straight to court after seeing them off. "I wish I could come with you too," she said, hugging Elijah carefully to avoid disturbing his oxygen line. "This discrimination case has the worst timing. We'll be fine," Terence assured her. "It's just 4 days until you join us. Besides, Elijah and I could use some father-son time before he's surrounded by all those science geniuses." Monica smiled, but her eyes held concern. "You have all the medical documentation triple-checked," Terence confirmed. "And you'll call me the second you land." First thing, Elijah promised. Their driver arrived precisely at 7:30, loading their luggage into the black SUV for the trip to O'Hare International Airport. The morning traffic moved surprisingly well, giving them ample time for check-in and security. What they hadn't anticipated was the first sign of trouble at the TSA checkpoint. "Sir, what's this device?" The TSA officer, whose name tag identified him as Ryan Thompson, held up Elijah's oxygen concentrator with suspicious scrutiny. "It's a portable oxygen concentrator," Dr. Reynolds explained, calmly reaching for the documentation in his carry-on. "My son has a medical condition requiring supplemental oxygen." Thompson frowned, examining the device as if it might contain explosives. "We'll need to see medical documentation and proper approval for this." "Of course," Terence said, maintaining his composure as he handed over the comprehensive file of paperwork. "Everything's in order. We've flown with this equipment before." Thompson flipped through the papers with exaggerated slowness, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. "And you're saying you're his doctor?" "No, I'm his father," Terence clarified. "I am a doctor. A cardiothoracic surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, but my son's pulmonologist provided all the necessary documentation there. Thompson continued to hold the line, examining each page with unnecessary thoroughness, while the queue behind them grew. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of the stares from other passengers. "I'll need to get a supervisor to verify this," Thompson finally said. 5 minutes later, a TSA supervisor arrived, her name tag reading Maria Gonzalez. She quickly reviewed the documentation and waved them through with an apologetic smile. "Everything looks in order, Dr. Reynolds. Sorry for the inconvenience." As they gathered their belongings, Terence noticed Elijah's tight expression. "You okay, son?" "Yeah," Elijah said quietly. "Just the usual." Terence nodded, understanding his son's frustration. Even at 16, Elijah had already experienced a lifetime of subtle and not so subtle discrimination. Being both black and now dealing with a medical condition made him doubly vulnerable to unwarranted scrutiny. They reached their gate with 40 minutes to spare. Several passengers in the waiting area glanced at Elijah's oxygen equipment with curious or uncomfortable expressions. Terence had learned to ignore such looks, but he knew each one landed like a tiny dart on his son's self-esteem. Dr. Reynolds, the gate agent, a young man named Trevor Phillips, approached them with a tablet in hand. "I noticed you're traveling with medical equipment. I just wanted to confirm we have you properly seated with access to power for the device if needed." Terence smiled with relief at the professional treatment. "Yes, thank you. We have all the documentation if you need to verify anything." "No need, sir. It's all in our system," Trevor assured them. "We've seated you in 3A and 3B in first class, where you'll have extra space and priority assistance if needed. We'll begin boarding in about 15 minutes. As Trevor walked away, Elijah exhaled audibly. "That was actually normal." "That's how it should always be," Terence replied. When boarding began, they joined the first group called. Just as they approached the jet bridge entrance, a flight attendant with a tight blonde bun and pressed lips stopped them. Her name tag read, Victoria Mercer, Senior Flight Attendant. "What's this equipment?" she asked sharply, pointing at Elijah's concentrator. Terence explained once again, offering the FAA approval documents. Mercer barely glanced at the paperwork. "Fine, I'll need to verify this with the captain once we're aboard. Some people think they deserve special treatment," she added under her breath, just loud enough for them to hear. As they settled into their spacious first-class seats, Elijah turned to his father. "Dad, I'm nervous about the program. What if everyone's smarter than me?" Terence adjusted his son's cannula with practiced care. "Let me tell you something. When I started my surgical residency, I was the only black doctor in my cohort. People assumed I was there because of affirmative action, not because I graduated top of my class. But you know what I did?" What Elijah asked, genuinely curious. "I let my work speak for itself." "Excellence can't be denied forever," Terence said. "And you, my son, are excellent." The plane began to taxi, and Elijah leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment of excitement about the prestigious program ahead. The Stanford University program had selected him from thousands of applicants for their summer science immersion program. Despite his health challenges, his research proposal on respiratory biometrics had impressed the selection committee as they taxied a different flight attendant whose name tag read Miguel Hernandez stopped by their seats. "Dr. Reynolds Elijah. I'm Miguel. I'll be one of your flight attendants today. I just wanted to check if there's anything specific you need for your device during the flight. We're all set." "Thank you," Terence replied, noticing how Miguel's genuine concern contrasted with Victoria's dismissiveness. Miguel smiled warmly. "Perfect. I've noted in our system that you have an approved medical device. If you need anything at all, just press the call button." As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, neither Elijah nor his father realized that their real troubles were about to begin. The seatbelt sign had barely turned off when Victoria Mercer appeared beside their row, her posture rigid and expression stern. "Sir, I need to inspect that device again," she demanded, gesturing to Elijah's oxygen concentrator. "We've already had it verified at the gate," Terence replied calmly. "The documentation is all here if you need to see it again." Victoria's lips tightened. "I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I determine what equipment can be used in flight." Terence took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. "I understand your concern for safety, Miss Mercer. This is an FAA-approved portable oxygen concentrator, specifically the Inogen 1G5 model that's permitted on all commercial flights. My son has a medical necessity for supplemental oxygen." Without asking permission, Victoria reached down and grabbed the folder of documentation from Elijah's lap. She flipped through it dismissively, barely reading the contents. "These papers could be anything," she said. "I'll need to consult with the flight crew." As she walked away with their documentation, Elijah glanced nervously at his father. "Dad, is this going to be a problem, Nobza?" Terence assured him, though uncertainty crept into his mind. They just need to follow their protocols. Several minutes later, Victoria returned, now accompanied by a man in a pilot's uniform. His name tag identified him as First Officer Dennis Palmer. "Dr. Reynolds," Palmer began, "I understand there's a concern about medical equipment." "There shouldn't be," Terence replied evenly. "My son has all the required documentation for his FAA-approved oxygen concentrator. Ms. Mercer has our paperwork." Palmer glanced at Victoria, who held the folder protectively. "The concern is whether the equipment has been properly vetted for aircraft safety. It has been," Terence explained, maintaining his professional demeanor. "That model is specifically listed in FAA regulations as approved for in-flight use. It's in the documentation that Miss Mercer is holding." Palmer looked uncomfortable, glancing between Victoria and the Reynolds. "I'll need to take this to the captain." As they waited, Elijah whispered to his father, "Why is she doing this?" Terence squeezed his son's hand. "Some people abuse whatever authority they have. Stay calm. We're in the right here." Around them, other first-class passengers had begun to notice the interaction. An older woman across the aisle frowned disapprovingly, though it wasn't clear whether her disapproval was directed at the flight crew or the Reynolds. Victoria returned without Palmer, her expression triumphant. "The device needs to be turned off for the duration of the flight. It's a safety protocol." Terence sat up straighter. "That's not possible. My son requires supplemental oxygen due to his pulmonary condition. Turning off the device would endanger his health. Then you should have made special arrangements with the airline medical desk before booking," she countered. "We did exactly that." Terence replied, his patience wearing thin. "It's all documented in the papers you're holding. Skyline Airways medical department approved this 3 weeks ago." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Well, I don't see that approval here. It's on page 3, clearly stamped by your medical department," Terence said, reaching for the folder. Victoria pulled it back. "I'll need to confiscate this equipment for safety reasons." The situation was escalating beyond reason. Terence looked around for Miguel or another crew member who might intervene, but Victoria was the only flight attendant in the first-class cabin at that moment. "Ms. Mercer," Terence said firmly, "removing my son's oxygen would constitute a serious medical risk. As a physician, I can't allow that. As the senior flight attendant, I have final authority over safety matters in this cabin," she retorted. A woman seated in 2C pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly. Victoria noticed and turned sharply toward her. "Photography is not permitted during flight," she snapped. "I'm not taking photos. I'm documenting a medical situation," the woman replied calmly. "I'm Laura Winters, a journalism professor at Berkeley." Victoria's face flushed. "This is a private matter." "It's a matter of passenger safety," Laura interrupted. "And I believe the young man needs his oxygen." Victoria turned back to the Reynolds, her expression hardening. "That device is interfering with aircraft communications. It needs to be shut off immediately." "That's scientifically impossible." Terence stated, "These devices are specifically shielded and tested not to interfere with aircraft systems. It's why they're FAA approved." Victoria's patience had clearly run out. Without warning, she reached toward the portable concentrator sitting on Elijah's lap. Mom Elijah cried out an alarm, instinctively protecting his lifeline. Terence moved to intercept Victoria's reach. Ms. Mercer, do not touch that device, but she was too quick. In one swift movement, Victoria grabbed the nasal cannula tube where it connected to the concentrator and yanked it hard. The tube disconnected and the sudden force pulled the prongs from Elijah's nose, causing an abrasion that immediately began to bleed. Blood's dripping from his nose. "What have you done?" Terence exclaimed, horrified at the sight of his son's blood. Elijah gasped, the sudden loss of supplemental oxygen sending his body into distress. His oxygen saturation would begin dropping immediately. Not permitted equipment. Victoria sneered, tucking the disconnected tube behind her back. Terence lunged forward, his medical license already in hand. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. That's FDA-approved medical equipment." But it was too late. Elijah's eyes were already rolling back, his caramel skin taking on an ashen hue as oxygen deprivation began. The crisis that would eventually transform the entire airline industry had begun with one impulsive discriminatory act. "My son can't breathe. Give me that tube now." Dr. Terran Reynolds rose to his full height, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to commanding operating rooms. Passengers throughout first class turned in their seats, witnessing Elijah's rapidly deteriorating condition. The boy was gasping now, his chest heaving in desperate attempts to compensate for the sudden oxygen loss. "I am exercising my authority as senior crew member," Victoria Mercer declared, still clutching the disconnected oxygen tube. This unapproved device could endanger everyone on board. Laura Winters had captured the entire incident on her phone. "I have it all on video," she announced loudly. "She just ripped oxygen equipment from a minor patient." A woman from row 4 stood up. "I'm Dr. Sophia Diaz, pulmonologist from UCSF Medical Center. That young man needs his oxygen immediately." Her Hispanic accent carried the weight of professional certainty as she moved forward. Victoria hesitated, suddenly aware of the growing number of witnesses. "The captain has final say on all safety matters." "This isn't about safety protocols," Dr. Diaz interrupted, positioning herself beside Elijah. "This is a medical emergency you've created. His oxygen saturation is dropping. I can see the cyanosis beginning around his lips." Terence was already accessing the portable oxygen concentrator, attempting to reconnect the tube Victoria had yanked away. His baseline blood oxygen is already compromised. Every second matters. Miguel Hernandez appeared in the cabin, immediately assessing the situation. "What happened?" he asked, eyes widening at the sight of blood on Elijah's shirt and the disconnected oxygen equipment. She removed his medically necessary oxygen. Laura explained, still recording forcefully. Victoria turned to Miguel. "The device wasn't cleared properly. It was cleared." Miguel cut her off, glancing at the documentation still in Victoria's hand. "I saw the approval in our pre-flight briefing." Terence was focused entirely on his son now. "Elijah, slow your breathing. Try to take deeper breaths." He turned to Miguel. "We need the emergency oxygen from the plane's medical kit immediately." Miguel nodded and moved quickly to retrieve it. Victoria remained frozen, her authority crumbling as passengers began using their phones, some recording others, apparently sending messages or posting to social media. "Someone needs to notify the captain," Dr. Diaz stated firmly. "This is a medical emergency requiring potential diversion." A distinguished older man in 1A stood up. "I'll make sure he knows." Without waiting for Victoria's response, he walked directly toward the cockpit. Victoria finally seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation. "I was following procedure. You assaulted a minor patient by removing life-supporting medical equipment," Dr. Diaz stated flatly. "I am documenting this patient's condition as an independent medical witness." Miguel returned with the aircraft's emergency medical kit and oxygen bottle. Terence quickly established a makeshift oxygen delivery system for Elijah, whose color had become alarmingly gray. His normal levels run around 94% with supplemental oxygen, Terence explained to Dr. Diaz. "He's probably below 85% now. The emergency oxygen will help stabilize him until we can reconnect his proper equipment." Dr. Diaz confirmed, helping position the mask over Elijah's face. Throughout the cabin, the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine transcontinental flight was now a scene of medical emergency and open conflict. Passengers watched in stunned silence or murmured in concerned groups. The video evidence continued to accumulate as multiple passengers documented the unfolding crisis. The older man returned from the cockpit, followed by Captain Benjamin Sullivan. "What's the situation?" Sullivan asked, taking in the scene with professional calm. Dr. Diaz spoke first. "Captain, we have a medical emergency. This young man has pulmonary fibrosis requiring supplemental oxygen. His equipment was forcibly removed by your senior flight attendant, causing physical injury and oxygen deprivation." Sullivan looked sharply at Victoria. "Is this accurate?" Miss Mercer. Victoria straightened her uniform jacket. "Captain, I was enforcing safety protocols regarding unapproved electronic devices. The documentation clearly shows it was approved," Miguel interjected, pointing to the papers still in Victoria's hand. "I verified it myself during boarding." Captain Sullivan took the folder from Victoria and quickly reviewed it. "This is all in order with proper medical and FAA approval." He looked at Terence. "Doctor, what does your son need right now?" "His own equipment reconnected," Terence replied. "It's calibrated specifically for his condition, and we may need to divert for medical evaluation after this oxygen deprivation episode." Sullivan nodded decisively. "Return his equipment immediately, Ms. Mercer." Victoria hesitated, then reluctantly handed over the nasal cannula she had ripped away. Terence quickly inspected it for damage before reconnecting it to the concentrator. "Miss Mercer, report to the rear galley," Sullivan ordered. "Mr. Hernandez will take over first-class service." He turned back to Terence. "Doctor, I'm going to contact our medical consultation service for guidance on diversion." "How stable is your son's condition?" "He's stabilizing with supplemental oxygen, but he experienced significant distress and trauma," Terence explained. "He should be evaluated for any complications from the incident." Sullivan nodded. "I'll arrange for priority medical response in Denver. We'll divert there. It's the closest suitable airport." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Victoria remained standing near the galley, her face a mask of defiance despite her clear misconduct. Laura Winters approached Terence. "Dr. Reynolds, I have the entire incident recorded. I'm a journalism professor and former CNN correspondent. This needs to be reported." "Thank you," Terence replied, still focused on monitoring Elijah's breathing. "I'd appreciate a copy of that recording." Another passenger, a woman in a crisp blazer who had been quietly observing from row 5, approached them. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm Leah Jacobson, Federal Air Marshal. I've documented the incident and will file an official report. Ms. Mercer's actions were completely outside protocol and potentially criminal. The revelation that an air marshal had witnessed everything added another layer of seriousness to the situation." Victoria, overhearing this, visibly palled. The plane began a controlled descent toward Denver, as announcements explained they were diverting for a medical emergency. Flight attendants, notably excluding Victoria, began preparing the cabin for arrival. Miguel stayed close to the Reynolds, ensuring Elijah had everything he needed. "How are you feeling?" Terence asked his son quietly. "Scared." Elijah admitted, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask, and embarrassed. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," Terence assured him, squeezing his hand. "Nothing that happened was your fault." Dr. Diaz, who had remained nearby monitoring Elijah's condition, nodded in agreement. "Your father's right. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone." When the plane landed in Denver, emergency medical personnel were waiting at the gate. As they boarded to assess, Elijah Jordan Fisher, identified as Skyline Airways Regional PR Director, also appeared. Dr. Reynolds, on behalf of Skyline Airways. "I want to express our deepest concern about what happened." Fisher began his words smooth and rehearsed. "We'll ensure your son receives the best care and we'll arrange accommodations until you're cleared to continue your journey." "What will happen to Miss Mercer?" Terence asked pointedly. Fisher's professional smile didn't waver. "We're conducting a full investigation into the incident. I assure you, appropriate action will be taken." As the medical team prepared to transport Elijah to the hospital, Terence noticed numerous passengers continuing to record. Some were openly uploading videos. Others were making calls describing what they'd witnessed. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft, racing across social media with the unstoppable momentum of genuine outrage. What none of them realized yet was how far-reaching the consequences would be, or how completely this incident would transform airline policies nationwide. But as Terence accompanied his son off the aircraft, his mind was already shifting from doctor mode to something else entirely. The determined advocate who would ensure this never happened to another passenger again. His oxygen saturation has stabilized at 93%, but we're concerned about the psychological trauma as much as the physical effects, Dr. Alicia Patel explained, reviewing Elijah's chart at Denver Memorial Hospital. 6 hours had passed since the harrowing incident on Skyline Airways Flight 427. Elijah lay in the hospital bed, the proper oxygen equipment now securely in place. The abrasion on his nose had been treated, but the emotional wounds were clearly still raw. He hadn't spoken much since their arrival. Terence nodded, understanding both as a father and a physician. What about cognitive assessment? Even brief hypoxia can potentially. We've done preliminary neurological testing, Dr. Patel assured him. No signs of impairment, but we'd like to keep him overnight for observation. A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Monica Reynolds burst through the door, her eyes wild with a mother's fear. "Elijah!" she cried, rushing to her son's bedside. She'd caught the first flight from Chicago after Terrence's urgent call. "Baby, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Elijah said quietly, though his expression told a different story. Monica turned to Terence, her legal mind already processing. "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out." As Terence recounted the events on the plane, Monica's expression transformed from concern to focused fury. The civil rights attorney who had successfully argued discrimination cases before the Supreme Court was emerging. The flight attendant physically removed his medical equipment against FAA regulations and with medical documentation in hand. Her voice was dangerously controlled. "It's all documented," Terence confirmed. Multiple passengers recorded it. A pulmonologist witnessed it. Even an air marshal was on board and documented the incident. Monica pulled out her tablet. "Show me the videos." Laura Winters had forwarded her recording to Terence, who now played it for Monica. The footage was damning Victoria Mercer's contemptuous expression as she yanked the oxygen tube, her dismissive not permitted equipment, comment the blood dripping from Elijah's nose and his immediate physical distress. "This is assault," Monica stated flatly, "against a minor with potential hate crime enhancements given the racial component and targeting of a disabled person." "Mom, I just want to forget about it," Elijah said softly. Monica sat on the edge of his bed. "Honey, I understand, but what happened to you isn't just about you. It's about every person of color with a medical condition who will board a plane in the future. If we don't fight this, it will happen again." Terrence's phone buzzed with an incoming call. "It's Dr. Diaz from the plane," he said, stepping into the hallway to answer. "Dr. Reynolds, I wanted to check on your son," Sophia's voice came through, "and to let you know that I've filed a formal complaint with the FAA and medical board regarding the incident. As a pulmonologist, I consider what happened to be dangerous medical misconduct. Thank you, Dr. Diaz. Elijah is stable but shaken. We're at Denver Memorial now. There's something else," she continued. "The videos are going viral. Had oxygen justice is trending. Major news networks have picked it up." Terence stepped back into the room to find Monica already scrolling through social media on her tablet. "It's exploding online," she confirmed. "Laura Winters' video has over 3 million views already." On the screen, CNN was running the footage with the headline, "Flight Attendant Removes Black Teen's Oxygen Device Mid-Flight." Other headlines followed in rapid succession. "Medical Emergency at 30,000 FTL's Airline Under Fire." "Doctor's son denied oxygen on Skyline flight. Discrimination or safety measure. Airline faces backlash." A text message appeared on Terrence's phone from an unknown number. "Dr. Reynolds, this is Miguel Hernandez from the flight. Please contact me privately when you can. There are things about Skyline you need to know." Meanwhile, Skyline Airways' official response had appeared on their social media channels. Skyline Airways is aware of an incident involving a passenger's medical device on Flight 427. The safety of our passengers is always our highest priority. We are investigating the matter and have placed the involved crew member on administrative leave pending review. We have reached out to the family to address their concerns. Administrative leave? Monica scoffed. They're already circling the wagons. Elijah, who had been quietly watching the unfolding media storm, finally spoke up. Dad, Mom, I don't want money from them. Both parents turned to him, surprised by the firmness in his voice. I want this to never happen to anyone else, he continued. No one should have to be afraid to breathe. In that moment, seeing his son's determination, despite his ordeal, Terence felt a surge of pride mixed with resolve. This wasn't going to be handled with a standard lawsuit and quiet settlement. The problem was bigger than one flight attendant or one airline. You're right, son, he said. This isn't about compensation. It's about transformation. Monica nodded, already thinking strategically. Then we need a different approach. Not just legal action, but a comprehensive campaign as they began to discuss possibilities. The hospital room television showed Skyline CEO Gregory Whitman at an emergency press conference. We at Skyline Airways are deeply concerned about the incident on Flight 427. We are conducting a thorough investigation and cooperating fully with FAA authorities. The actions depicted do not reflect our company values or training protocols. Notice he doesn't actually apologize or acknowledge what happened. Monica observed corporate doublespeak. A knock at the door revealed a hospital administrator. Dr. Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds. There are reporters gathering in the lobby requesting statements. The situation was accelerating faster than any of them had anticipated. What had begun as a personal trauma was rapidly becoming a national conversation about discrimination, medical rights, and corporate accountability. Meanwhile, at Skyline Airways headquarters, an emergency meeting was underway. CEO Gregory Whitman faced his executive team across the conference table, their expressions grim. The stock is down 8% already. CFO Thomas Geller reported, major corporate clients are calling threatening to cancel their travel contracts. Legal counsel Stephanie Patel slid a folder across the table. We need to offer a settlement immediately. The optics are catastrophic. A white flight attendant physically removing medical equipment from a black teenager with a documented disability. The lawsuit potential is enormous. What about the flight attendant Mercer Whitman asked? She claims she was following safety protocols, Patel replied. But the documentation clearly shows the device was properly approved. Her personnel file shows concerning patterns, meaning 3 previous complaints about her treatment of minority passengers, 2 specifically involving passengers with medical accommodations. All were handled quietly with vouchers. Whitman rubbed his temples. Fire her. It's not that simple, Patel cautioned. If we terminate her immediately, it could be seen as admitting liability. I recommend administrative leave during an investigation while we work on settling with the family. How bad could this get? Whitman asked. The PR director cleared his throat. Very bad, sir. The hashtag Oxygen Justice is approaching 5 million impressions. Major advocacy organizations are issuing statements. The doctor's wife is Monica Reynolds. Yes, that Monica Reynolds, the civil rights attorney. This has all the elements of a perfect storm. As the crisis meeting continued, none of them realized that the true extent of the problem went far deeper than one incident or one employee. The Reynolds family was about to uncover patterns of discrimination that would shake the entire industry to its core. A settlement isn't enough, Monica declared, pacing the hospital room that had become their impromptu command center. Skyline will write a check issue and apology fire. Victoria Mercer, and nothing will actually change. Elijah, sitting up in bed with much improved color, watched his parents intently. The doctors had cleared him to be discharged the following morning, finding no lasting physical damage from the oxygen deprivation episode. What are you thinking? Terence asked his wife. We need a 3-pronged approach. Monica replied, her legal mind mapping the strategy. Legal action, yes, but specifically designed to force disclosure of patterns and policies, not just this incident. Second, medical expertise to establish standards for how airlines must accommodate passengers with medical needs. And third, public pressure to ensure accountability. Terence nodded. So, not just a lawsuit against Skyline and Victoria Mercer. Much bigger, Monica confirmed. We target the structural issues that allowed this to happen in the first place. Elijah spoke up. I want to be involved, not just as the victim. His parents exchanged glances, both protective, but recognizing their son's determination. We'll be careful about your public exposure, Monica assured him. But yes, your voice matters in this. Terrence's phone buzzed again. Miguel Hernandez requesting a secure call. I should speak with him. The flight attendant who helped us mentioned having important information about Skyline. While Terrence stepped out to make the call, Monica began making a list of contacts. We need Diego Mendes for the civil rights aspects of the case and a medical expert panel, your colleagues, who can establish proper standards for in-flight medical accommodations. When Terrence returned, his expression was grim. We have a much bigger problem than one biased flight attendant. According to Miguel, Skyline has an internal coding system they use to flag certain passengers for additional attention during flights. Let me guess, Monica said, her voice tight. Those codes disproportionately target people of color, especially those with special requests or medical accommodations, Terrence confirmed. They call it their passenger attention protocol. Miguel says Victoria was likely responding to Elijah being flagged in the system when she targeted him. That's institutional discrimination, Monica said. Already typing notes and potentially violates multiple federal laws. Miguel is willing to provide documentation, but he's afraid of retaliation. He's worked for Skyline for 8 years. We can protect him as a whistleblower, Monica assured. Is he the only one willing to come forward? He mentioned another flight attendant, Natalie Parker. She's been collecting evidence of discrimination patterns for nearly a year. Elijah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. So, Ms. Mercer wasn't just being cruel on her own. She was following some kind of company policy. It appears that way, Terrence confirmed, which makes this about much more than one bad employee. Over the next 48 hours, their strategy took shape. Monica contacted Diego Mendes, one of the nation's foremost civil rights attorneys, who immediately agreed to join the case. Terrence reached out to medical colleagues who specialized in respiratory care, aviation medicine, and patient rights. A conference call with Miguel and Natalie revealed disturbing details about Skyline's internal practices. The PAP system passenger attention protocol uses a series of codes on passenger manifests, Natalie explained. Code M designates medical equipment, which is standard industry practice, but Skyline adds secondary codes A for additional verification needed and S for special attention during flight. How are these codes assigned? Diego asked. That's where it gets problematic, Miguel replied. The algorithm supposedly factors in security concerns, but in practice, passengers of color with medical accommodations are flagged for S at 8 times the rate of white passengers with identical accommodations. Natalie continued, flight attendants like Victoria are trained to give special attention to these passengers, supposedly for security. The training videos use coded language about being extra vigilant with certain passengers who might abuse accommodations or present unconventional security concerns. The evidence was damning. What had happened to Elijah wasn't an isolated incident, but the inevitable result of discriminatory policies embedded in the airline's operations. Meanwhile, Skyline had been busy with their own response. CEO Gregory Whitman appeared on morning shows expressing deep concern while carefully avoiding admission of wrongdoing. Victoria Mercer remained on administrative leave, neither fired nor defended. The airline's representatives had made 3 attempts to contact the Reynolds family with settlement offers, each higher than the last. On day 3, as Elijah was preparing to be discharged, the hospital room TV showed breaking news. Skyline had hired Apex Communications, a high-powered crisis management firm known for aggressive tactics. They're going to try to control the narrative, Monica warned. We need to move quickly before they start a counter-campaign. Within hours, subtle shifts appeared in media coverage. Questions arose about whether Elijah's equipment had been properly documented. Despite the clear evidence, it had been. A medical expert on one network suggested that brief oxygen removal posed minimal risk and questioned whether the response was overblown. Most disturbing was an article citing anonymous airline sources claiming that Dr. Terence Reynolds had a history of confrontations with flight crews and had demanded special treatment based on his status as a doctor. "They're trying to discredit us," Terence observed, reading the fabricated claims. Classic deflection tactics. The pressure extended beyond media. Terence received a call from the chief of surgery at Northwestern Memorial. "Terence, I support you completely," Dr. Williams began. "But I should inform you that several board members with connections to Skyline's parent company have expressed concerns about the publicity." Nothing official, of course. The message was clear. Powerful interests were aligning against them. Monica faced similar pressures when two corporate clients of her law firm requested temporary reassignment of their cases to other attorneys, citing concerns about bandwidth given her family situation. Even Elijah wasn't immune. The Stanford program director called to express support, but mentioned logistical concerns about his participation given the heightened attention the case was receiving. "They're trying to isolate us," Monica realized. "Make fighting so costly that we'll settle quietly." What Skyline hadn't counted on was the determination of the Reynolds family and the team they were assembling. Diego Mendez brought in his media team and digital strategist Zoe Richardson, who helped coordinate the growing social media movement around the case. Dr. Sofia Diaz, who had witnessed the incident firsthand, publicly announced her participation as a medical expert for the case, lending her considerable professional reputation to the cause. "What I witnessed was not only medically dangerous, but a violation of basic human dignity," she stated in a press conference. "As healthcare providers, we must stand up when we see harm done." The most unexpected ally emerged when Air Marshal Leah Jacobson filed her official report, which categorically stated that Victoria Mercer's actions had created an unnecessary safety risk and violated multiple FAA regulations regarding approved medical devices. Her clear factual account directly contradicted Skyline's attempt to create ambiguity around what had occurred. By the end of the week, the groundwork had been laid for a comprehensive response to what had happened on Flight 427. It wouldn't just be a lawsuit or a public relations battle. It would be a campaign to expose and transform an entire industry's approach to discrimination and medical accommodation. As they finalized their strategy, Elijah sat with his parents in their hotel suite. "I keep thinking about other kids like me," he said quietly. "Who might not have a surgeon for a dad or a famous attorney for a mom? What happens to them when someone decides they don't deserve to breathe?" The question hung in the air, underscoring the true stakes of their fight. This wasn't just about justice for one family. It was about ensuring that no passenger ever again had to fear having their oxygen taken away because of who they were. Skyline Airways didn't just fail my son on Flight 427. Monica Reynolds stated, standing before a forest of microphones. "They failed every passenger who trusts airlines with their safety." The press conference announcing their comprehensive legal action drew national media attention. The lawsuit filed that morning named not only Skyline Airways and Victoria Mercer as defendants, but also included claims regarding institutionalized patterns of discrimination in passenger screening and accommodation policies. Diego Mendez outlined the legal framework. This action includes claims of assault battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress against Ms. Mercer. Against Skyline Airways, we've filed claims of negligent hiring and supervision violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The scope of the lawsuit was unprecedented, designed not merely to seek damages, but to force disclosure of internal policies and practices. The complaint specifically demanded preservation of all data related to Skyline's passenger attention protocol system and statistical analysis of how medical accommodations were handled across demographic groups. Elijah stood with his parents but did not speak at the press conference. Their strategy deliberately limited his public exposure while emphasizing the structural issues at stake. His presence, however, put a human face to the case, a teenager who had simply needed to breathe. The response was swift. Skyline stock dropped another 12% by market close. Social media exploded with oxygen justice posts, many from passengers sharing their own experiences with discrimination on airlines. Medical associations issued statements expressing concern about airline handling of passenger health needs. Skyline's counter-offensive began the next morning. CEO Gregory Whitman appeared on business news programs defending the airline's safety record and commitment to proper training. While we take the allegations seriously, we stand by our safety protocols and the professionalism of our crew members, he stated. More concerning were the coordinated attacks that followed. A conservative commentator questioned whether the Reynolds family was exploiting an unfortunate incident for financial gain. Articles appeared examining Monica's legal career, suggesting she had a history of targeting corporations with discrimination claims. Most disturbing was the campaign targeting Terence professionally. An anonymous medical blog published an article questioning his judgment in exposing his son to the risks of air travel with a serious respiratory condition. Colleagues reported being contacted by journalists asking about his temperament and previous incidents of confrontational behavior. "They're trying to destroy our credibility," Terence observed during a strategy session with their legal team. "Make it seem like we're the problem," Diego nodded grimly. Standard playbook. Discredit the plaintiffs to distract from the evidence. The discovery process revealed just how far Skyline would go to protect their practices. Their initial document production was deliberately overwhelming, over 300,000 pages of largely irrelevant material, while simultaneously claiming that specific requests for PAP system documentation were overly broad and not reasonably calculated to lead to admissible evidence. Judge Elena Fernandez saw through the tactics. The court is not impressed by dilatory discovery practices. She admonished Skyline's attorneys. "I am ordering full production of all PAP system documentation, including algorithm parameters, implementation guidelines, and statistical outcomes within 14 days. This ruling broke the case open. The PAP documents revealed what Miguel and Natalie had described: a systematic process for flagging certain passengers for additional scrutiny that resulted in vastly disproportionate targeting of passengers of color with medical needs. Most damning was an email chain between executives discussing the optics problem of the PAP system statistics. The numbers look bad if viewed from a certain perspective," wrote Skyline Operations Director. "But the system generates efficiency benefits that outweigh the PR risk as long as we maintain appropriate discretion in how these protocols are described publicly." Victoria Mercer's personnel file, finally produced under court order, contained 7 previous complaints involving passengers of colour, 3 specifically related to questioning medical devices or accommodations. In each case, the complaints had been resolved with travel vouchers and no disciplinary action. As these revelations became public through court filings, Skyline's strategy shifted to damage control. Victoria Mercer was officially terminated, with the airline claiming zero tolerance for violation of our passenger care standards. This transparent attempt to distance themselves from a policy they had created and enforced was immediately called out by the Reynolds team. Firing Ms. Mercer doesn't address the underlying problem, Monica stated in response. She was following exactly the kind of special attention Skyline trained her to give to passengers like my son. The pressure on Skyline intensified when Miguel Hernandez and Natalie Parker finally went public with their testimonies, despite the professional risk. In a joint interview, they described the coded training they had received about high-attention passengers and how the airline's internal culture encouraged skepticism towards certain passengers' accommodation needs. "We were trained to question more persistently when certain passengers presented medical equipment." Natalie explained the training videos never explicitly mentioned race, but all the examples of passengers requiring additional verification were people of color. Congressional interest followed. The House Transportation Committee announced hearings on discrimination in air travel, with particular focus on medical accommodation practices. The Department of Transportation launched its own investigation into potential Air Carrier Access Act violations across the industry. Skyline's corporate customers began suspending their contracts. A tech giant announced it would pause its relationship with Skyline pending resolution of serious concerns about equitable treatment of passengers. Other companies followed, citing corporate diversity commitments that were incompatible with the emerging evidence of Skyline's practices. For the Reynolds family, the public battle came with personal costs. Elijah struggled with anxiety about returning to school and public spaces. Recurring nightmares of not being able to breathe led Terence and Monica to arrange sessions with Dr. Andrea Ramirez, a psychologist specializing in trauma recovery. What you're experiencing is a normal response to an abnormal situation, Dr. Ramirez assured Elijah. Your brain and body are processing a threat to your most basic need, oxygen. Terence faced a hospital review board examination after Skyline surrogates raised questions about his public statements regarding airline medical protocols. Though he was ultimately cleared of any professional concerns, the process was stressful and time-consuming. Monica worked around the clock balancing the Skyline case with her ongoing civil rights caseload and family needs. The strain showed in quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. Through it all, they remained united in purpose. We started this for Elijah Terence, reminded Monica one night as they reviewed case documents long after their son had gone to bed. But it's become about something much bigger. That's how change happens, Monica replied, squeezing his hand. One family decides that this far and no further. As pressure mounted on all sides, an unexpected development shifted the dynamics of the case. Victoria Mercer, through her attorney, requested a meeting with the Reynolds family. It's a trap, Diego warned immediately. They want to get statements they can use against us, or she wants to apologize to mitigate her own legal exposure, Monica suggested. Either way, I think we should hear what she has to say, Terence said thoughtfully. With full legal representation present, of course. The decision wasn't easy, especially for Elijah. I don't know if I can face her, he admitted to Dr. Ramirez during a therapy session. You don't have to, she assured him. But sometimes confronting the source of our fear can be powerful as long as it's on your terms, not hers. After careful consideration, the family agreed to the meeting with strict parameters. It would take place in Diego's office with full legal representation. It would be recorded, and most importantly, Elijah would decide at the last moment whether he wished to attend or not. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal just how deep Skyline's problems truly went. A palpable tension filled Diego Mendez's conference room as Victoria Mercer entered with her attorney, a nervous-looking man named Philip Garrison. She appeared smaller somehow, her Skyline uniform replaced by a conservative navy suit, her previously rigid posture now uncertain. Terence and Monica sat across the table with Diego and his team flanking them. Elijah had ultimately decided to attend but sat slightly behind his parents, partially shielded from Victoria's direct line of sight. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Victoria began, her voice lacking the authoritative edge it had carried on the aircraft. I wanted to speak with you directly. We're listening, Monica replied neutrally. Victoria glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. First, I want to acknowledge that my actions on Flight 427 were wrong. I should never have removed Elijah's oxygen equipment regardless of any concerns I might have had. The careful wording concerns I might have had rather than a full admission of discrimination was telling. Why did you do it? Terence asked directly. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. I was following company protocols for flagged passengers requiring special attention. Elijah's file contained both an M code for medical equipment and an S code for special attention. And what exactly does special attention mean in Skyline's training? Diego pressed. We're trained to apply enhanced scrutiny to passengers with S designations. Victoria admitted the training emphasizes that some passengers may attempt to use medical accommodations to circumvent safety protocols. Were you shown statistics about how often that actually happens? Monica asked. No, Victoria conceded. It was presented as a common concern. And were you aware that passengers of color receive S designations at 8 times the rate of white passengers with identical accommodation requests? Diego continued. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. I wasn't given those statistics. No, The questioning continued, gradually revealing the extent to which Victoria had been operating within a system designed to create exactly the kind of incident that occurred. While not absolving her personal responsibility, it became clear that she was also a product of institutional biases embedded in training and protocols. The most significant moment came when Elijah finally spoke. "Ms. Mercer, when you took my oxygen away, what did you think would happen to me?" The directness of the question from the young man she had harmed visibly affected Victoria. For the first time, her carefully maintained facade cracked. I didn't really think about it," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "We were taught to be suspicious, to question, to assert authority. I was more focused on enforcing rules than considering the human impact. I couldn't breathe," Elijah said simply. "I was scared. I was going to die." Victoria looked down at the table. "I know, and there's no excuse for what I did to you." She looked up again, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "After watching the videos, after seeing what I actually did from an outside perspective, I was horrified. That's not who I want to be." What followed was unexpected. Victoria's attorney placed a thumb drive on the table. "Ms. Mercer has decided to provide documentation that may be relevant to your case against Skyline Airways." The thumb drive contained Victoria's complete training materials, including videos showing how flight attendants were instructed to handle special attention passengers. More significantly, it included internal communications about the PAP system that had not been produced in discovery evidence that executives were fully aware of its discriminatory outcomes. "Why are you giving us this?" Monica asked. Victoria met her gaze steadily. "Because what happened to your son wasn't just my failure. It was the result of a system that taught me to be suspicious of certain passengers. I have to take responsibility for my actions, but Skyline needs to take responsibility for creating the environment where this was not only possible, but encouraged." The meeting marked a turning point in the case. Victoria's testimony and documents provided irrefutable evidence of institutional discrimination that Skyline could no longer deny or minimize. Within days, she had agreed to testify against the airline in exchange for a more lenient settlement of the claims against her personally. Public opinion, already largely supportive of the Reynolds family, solidified further as Victoria's revelations made headlines. Medical associations issued joint statements condemning discriminatory practices in passenger accommodations. Disability rights organizations joined the case as amici curiae, providing additional legal weight. Skyline's stock plummeted to a 5-year low. Major shareholders began calling for leadership changes, and the board scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss strategic responses to the ongoing situation. Corporate clients continued suspending their contracts, with several explicitly citing the discrimination evidence in their public announcements. The congressional hearings provided another forum for the evidence to be presented. Miguel, Natalie, and Victoria all testified about the patterns of discrimination they had observed and participated in. Medical experts, including Dr. Sophia Diaz, presented data on the real dangers of oxygen deprivation and the importance of respecting medical accommodations. Most powerful was Elijah's testimony. Though initially reluctant to speak publicly, he delivered a clear, composed account of his experience. "I had done everything right," he told the congressional panel. "I had all the documentation. My equipment was FAA approved. My condition was legitimate. None of that mattered because someone looked at me and decided I didn't deserve the same right to breathe as everyone else on that plane." The tide had turned decisively. What began as one family's fight for justice had evolved into a national reckoning about discrimination in air travel and the treatment of passengers with medical needs. Skyline CEO Gregory Whitman, facing immense pressure from shareholders, finally abandoned the defensive posture. "We have failed to live up to our responsibility to treat all passengers with dignity and respect," he acknowledged in a press statement. "The evidence presented regarding our passenger attention protocol system reveals unacceptable disparities that cannot be justified. Today, I am announcing the immediate suspension of this system and a comprehensive review of all passenger screening and accommodation policies." For the Reynolds family, the developments brought vindication, but not completion. The case was moving toward resolution, but the true measure of success would be in the lasting changes implemented across the industry. They're starting to understand they can't win this fight, Monica observed as they reviewed the latest legal developments. Now we need to make sure the changes are substantial and permanent. Terence nodded. Not just at Skyline. The whole industry needs new standards for how passengers with medical needs are treated. Elijah, who had grown more confident through the process, added his perspective. And people need to know their rights. Most passengers don't have parents who are doctors and lawyers. They need to know what accommodations they're entitled to. As the case approached its judicial conclusion, the family's focus shifted from winning the legal battle, which now seemed assured, to shaping the remedy in ways that would create lasting impact. The final phase would determine whether Elijah's traumatic experience would truly transform how airlines operated, or whether corporate interests would find ways to minimize change once public attention inevitably moved on. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Judge Elena Fernandez entered the courtroom for the final hearing in Reynolds versus Skyline Airways. After months of legal maneuvering, document production and testimony, the case had reached its culmination. Skyline had finally conceded to a settlement rather than risk the public exposure of a full trial. Today's hearing would determine whether Judge Fernandez would approve the terms and the substantial institutional changes the agreement contained. Before the court renders its decision, Judge Fernandez began. I would like to hear directly from the parties about the proposed settlement terms. Gregory Whitman took the stand first. His testimony carefully crafted to acknowledge wrongdoing while preserving what dignity remained for the airline. Your Honor, Skyline Airways acknowledges that our policies and training regarding passengers with medical accommodations were fundamentally flawed. He stated, the passenger attention protocol system, while designed with security intentions, resulted in discriminatory outcomes that cannot be justified. Under cross-examination from Diego Whitman, was forced to admit more specific failures. Yes, our internal reviews showed statistically significant disparities in how passengers of color with medical needs were treated compared to white passengers with identical accommodations. And did Skyline take any action to address these disparities when they were identified? Diego pressed, not sufficient action, no. Whitman conceded. Victoria Mercer's testimony followed. Without the corporate shield, her account was more direct. We were trained to be suspicious of certain passengers. The training videos used coded language, but the message was clear about which passengers deserved extra scrutiny. And what criteria determined which passengers received this extra scrutiny? Diego asked. The SCODE was applied disproportionately to passengers of color, especially those with accommodation requests, Victoria confirmed. We weren't explicitly told to discriminate, but the system was designed to produce that result. Most powerful was the expert testimony demonstrating that what happened to Elijah wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Statistical analysis showed that black passengers with medical devices were 12 times more likely to have their equipment questioned or restricted than white passengers with identical equipment. As the evidence concluded, Judge Fernandez addressed the parties directly. The court has reviewed the proposed settlement agreement. While financial compensation is appropriate for the harm suffered by the Reynolds family, I am particularly interested in the structural changes proposed. Monica stepped forward to outline the institutional reforms Skyline had agreed to implement. Complete elimination of the PAP system and development of new accommodation protocols with oversight from medical and civil rights experts. Comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff with specific modules on medical accommodation. Establishment of an independent oversight committee to review accommodation requests and complaints. Quarterly public reporting of accommodation statistics across demographic groups. Development of clear, accessible information for passengers about their rights regarding medical equipment. Implementation of the Reynolds Protocol for verification of medical devices, emphasizing passenger dignity and medical necessity. These changes, Monica explained, are designed to ensure that what happened to our son never happens to another passenger. Judge Fernandez nodded thoughtfully. And is there a mechanism to ensure these changes are actually implemented rather than merely promised. Yes, Your Honor, Diego replied. The settlement includes judicial oversight for a period of 5 years with substantial financial penalties for non-compliance. After considering all testimony, Judge Fernandez delivered her ruling. The court finds that the proposed settlement is fair and addresses both the individual harms suffered by the Reynolds family and the broader institutional issues identified in this case. She continued with a powerful statement that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. The court recognizes that Skyline's actions went beyond negligence or momentary poor judgment. When you create systems that discriminate when you train employees to view certain passengers with suspicion based on their race or medical needs, you violate not just federal aviation regulations, but the most basic covenant of human dignity. This settlement, she concluded, represents an opportunity for meaningful change in how airlines accommodate passengers with medical needs. The court will retain jurisdiction to ensure full compliance with its terms. The resolution included significant financial compensation for the Reynolds family, though the exact amount remained confidential. More important to them were the structural reforms that would impact millions of future passengers. Victoria Mercer received a 15-month suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service working with organizations serving youth of color with medical conditions. Her willingness to testify against Skyline had significantly reduced her personal legal consequences. As the proceedings concluded, reporters clamored for statements outside the courthouse. Monica and Terence addressed the media, briefly focusing on the institutional changes rather than the personal victory. Today marks the beginning, not the end, Monica stated. The real measure of success will be when every passenger can board a plane knowing their medical needs will be respected, regardless of the color of their skin. Within weeks, the impact began to spread beyond Skyline. Other major carriers, recognizing the liability and reputational risks, announced reviews of their own accommodation policies. The Federal Aviation Administration initiated development of new industry-wide standards based largely on the Reynolds Protocol. The financial settlement, while substantial, wasn't the end point for the Reynolds family. Terence and Monica established the Reynolds Foundation for Medical Equality, dedicated to supporting young people of color with medical conditions and advocating for equal treatment in transportation and public accommodations. The Foundation's first initiative funded a comprehensive guide for passengers with medical needs, explaining their legal rights and proper procedures for accommodations. Its second program provided legal advocacy for those who experienced discrimination similar to Elijah's. Industry changes accelerated as Skyline's competitors recognized that adopting progressive policies voluntarily was preferable to being forced by regulation. Major airlines announced new training programs, simplified accommodation procedures, and clearer passenger rights information. For Skyline Airways, the path forward was challenging but clear. Under new leadership, Gregory Whitman had resigned under board pressure. The company embarked on the comprehensive reforms required by the settlement. Miguel Hernandez was promoted to head a new passenger advocacy department, while Natalie Parker joined the Independent Oversight Committee. The Reynolds regulations, as they became known throughout the industry, established clear guidelines that prioritized passenger safety and dignity over subjective crew member judgments. Airlines were required to implement verification procedures that respected medical necessity while maintaining appropriate safety standards. Through it all, the Reynolds family remained focused on ensuring that Elijah's traumatic experience served as a catalyst for genuine change. The transformation of airline practices wouldn't erase what had happened on Flight 427, but it gave purpose to their pain and protection to countless future passengers. The Reynolds Foundation is proud to announce the launch of our Breathe Free initiative, Terence declared to the assembled crowd at the Foundation's first anniversary gala. This program will provide support for young people of color with respiratory conditions, ensuring they have access to proper medical equipment, knowledge of their rights, and advocacy when needed. 1 year had passed since the landmark settlement with Skyline Airways. The foundation, established with a portion of the settlement funds, had already assisted dozens of families and was working with congressional representatives on new legislation to strengthen protections for travelers with medical needs. The audience included many who had played crucial roles in the case. Diego Mendez, Dr. Sofia Diaz, Miguel Hernandez, Natalie Parker, and even Air Marshal Leah Jacobson. Notably absent was Victoria Mercer, though she had become an unexpected ally in the reform movement, speaking regularly to airline staff about the dangers of discriminatory practices. Monica stepped forward to continue the presentation. "The most significant victory isn't what we won in court," she told the audience. "It's what's happening in airports and on aircraft every day. Medical accommodations that are handled with dignity, documentation processes that respect passengers' needs. Training that emphasizes equality and understanding." Industry data supported her claims. Complaints regarding medical accommodation denials had decreased by 78% across all airlines. The disparities in treatment between white passengers and passengers of color with identical medical needs, while not eliminated, had narrowed significantly. The Reynolds regulations had been formally adopted by the FAA, requiring all commercial airlines to implement standardized protocols for passengers with medical needs. The regulations specifically prohibited discriminatory application of safety rules and required statistical monitoring to identify potential patterns of bias. For Elijah, the journey of healing had progressed steadily, but not without challenges. The physical recovery had been complete. His pulmonary fibrosis had improved to the point where he no longer needed supplemental oxygen except during strenuous activity or air travel. The psychological impact had manifested in unexpected ways. Anxiety when boarding planes, heightened alertness around authority figures, occasional nightmares reliving the moment of oxygen deprivation. Through therapy with Dr. Ramirez and the unwavering support of his family, Elijah had gradually reclaimed his sense of security. Each milestone, his first flight after the incident speaking at a national conference on medical equality starting at Stanford, represented not just personal healing, but a public reclamation of spaces that discrimination had temporarily made hostile. Now, as Elijah stepped up to the podium at the Foundation Gala, his growth was evident in his confident posture and clear voice. "When I lost my oxygen on that flight, I thought it was just about me," he told the hushed audience. "I didn't understand then that what happened was part of something much bigger. Patterns of discrimination that affect thousands of people every day." He continued, "Through the foundation, I've met kids as young as 8 who were afraid to fly because of how they'd been treated due to their medical equipment. I've talked with parents who drive 20 hours rather than subject their children to the scrutiny and suspicion they've faced on planes. But I've also seen change happening," he added with a smile. "Last month, I flew to a science competition. When I boarded with my portable oxygen concentrator, which I still need for flying, the flight attendant didn't question my documentation or give me suspicious looks. She simply said, 'I see you have medical equipment. Is there anything you need to make your flight more comfortable?'" The audience applauded warmly. Elijah's personal story had become emblematic of both the problem and the solution. How discrimination could harm vulnerable individuals, but also how targeted reforms could create meaningful change. After the gala, the Reynolds family received news that further validated their work. The Department of Transportation was establishing a new division specifically focused on ensuring equal access to transportation for passengers with medical needs. The division would be guided by an advisory board that included medical professionals, civil rights experts, and passenger advocates, including Monica Reynolds. Terence had recently resumed his medical practice with a new focus on underserved communities. His experiences had changed his approach to medicine, making him more attuned to the ways biases could affect patient care. He had also established a mentoring program for young people of color interested in medical careers, with Elijah serving as a peer mentor despite still being in high school. Elijah himself had thrived academically at Stanford's summer program and was now applying to colleges with plans to pursue pre-medical studies. The trauma had somewhat unexpectedly crystallized his career aspirations. "I want to become a pulmonologist like Dr. Diaz," he told his parents, using my experience to help others who struggle to breathe freely in every sense of that phrase. The industry transformation continued to spread. Airlines beyond Skyline had recognized that proper accommodation of passengers with medical needs wasn't just about avoiding liability. It was good business. Training programs now emphasize the dignity of all passengers, with specific modules on avoiding implicit bias when implementing safety protocols. Miguel Hernandez, now Skyline's Director of Passenger Advocacy, had implemented a whistleblower protection program that encouraged staff to report potential discrimination without fear of retaliation. Natalie Parker had been promoted to training development, where she was helping create new instruction materials focused on equitable treatment. Even Victoria Mercer had found an unexpected path to redemption. After completing her community service, she had been hired by a medical advocacy organization to provide perspective on how institutional biases manifest in practice. Her presentations to airline staff were powerful precisely because she could speak from the experience of having participated in the very discrimination she now worked to prevent. 3 months after the Foundation Gala, the Reynolds family received the American Civil Liberties Union's Humanitarian Award for turning personal trauma into positive social change. At the ceremony, Elijah, now thriving at Stanford, delivered an acceptance speech that brought the audience to their feet. "What happened to me was wrong. But the response from thousands of ordinary people who demanded justice was profoundly right," he told the crowd. "Together, we've transformed a moment of discrimination into a movement for equality." The ultimate test came during spring break when Elijah boarded a flight from San Francisco to Chicago to visit his family. The difference in experience was remarkable. The new flight attendant, having recognized his name during check-in, went above and beyond to ensure his comfort, discreetly asking if he required any accommodations without making a spectacle of the interaction. More significantly, Elijah noticed a young Hispanic child several rows ahead who also used a portable oxygen concentrator. The flight crew treated the child and his family with dignity and respect. Following the new protocols that had been implemented industry-wide following the Reynolds case as the child passed Elijah's row during deplaning, their eyes met in a moment of silent recognition. The boy's mother glanced between them, suddenly realizing who Elijah was. "Thank you," she mouthed silently over her son's head. That evening at dinner with his parents, Elijah shared the experience seeing that kid being treated with dignity, knowing he didn't have to go through what I did, that made everything worth it. Terrence squeezed his son's shoulder, reflecting on their journey from victims to advocates to change makers. The problem hadn't transformed completely. Discrimination never disappeared overnight, but meaningful progress had occurred and lives were being protected as a result. "I've made a decision," Elijah announced as they finished dessert. "I'm going to apply to medical school after Stanford. I want to become a pulmonologist like Dr. Diaz." Monica smiled knowingly. "Following in your father's footsteps into medicine." "But charting my own path," Elijah clarified. "Using my experience to help others who struggle to breathe freely in every sense of that phrase." As the Reynolds family drove home through the Chicago evening, the lights of the city twinkling around them, they carried with them the knowledge that their courage had created ripples of change extending far beyond their personal victory. Through determination, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to justice, they had transformed a moment of trauma into a movement that would help countless families breathe easier for years to come. The airport terminal buzzed with typical activity as Elijah Reynolds made his way to the gate. 2 years had passed since Victoria Mercer had ripped his oxygen tube away, and he was traveling to Washington, D.C. to present at a national medical conference on respiratory care equality. At 19, Elijah had grown taller, his shoulders broader, his presence more confident. The portable oxygen concentrator he still used for air travel was smaller now. A newer model developed with input from the Reynolds Foundation's Medical Advisory Board. His pulmonary condition had improved significantly with treatment, but air travel's reduced cabin pressure still required supplemental oxygen. As he approached security, he felt the familiar twinge of anxiety. A ghost of trauma that therapy had diminished but not completely erased. He presented his medical documentation to the TSA agent, who reviewed it professionally and waved him through without the unnecessary scrutiny that had once been routine. "Have a good flight, Mr. Reynolds," the agent said, returning his ID and boarding pass. At the gate, the agent's eyes widened slightly in recognition when she scanned his boarding pass. "Mr. Reynolds, we're honored to have you with us today," she said quietly. "If you need anything at all during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask." Word had traveled through the airline industry about the young man whose experience had transformed their practices. Elijah nodded with a polite smile, appreciating the recognition without wanting special treatment. Once aboard and settled in his seat, a flight attendant approached. "Mr. Reynolds, I just wanted to verify that your portable oxygen concentrator is set up comfortably. Our records show you've completed all the necessary documentation." "Everything's fine, thank you," Elijah replied. The attendant hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I just wanted to say, the changes your family fought for have made a real difference for us too. We have proper training now, clear guidelines. It's better for everyone." As the flight progressed, Elijah noticed a young Hispanic boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, seated 3 rows ahead. The child also had a nasal cannula connected to a portable oxygen concentrator nearly identical to Elijah's earlier model. The flight attendants treated the boy and his family with quiet dignity, checking in periodically without making a spectacle of his needs. When the plane began its descent into Reagan National, Elijah observed the boy's mother helping him adjust his oxygen flow for the pressure changes exactly as his own parents had once done for him. There was no scrutiny, no questioning, no demand for additional verification. Just a family traveling like any other, their medical needs accommodated without drama. As passengers began deplaning, Elijah waited patiently for his turn to exit. The Hispanic family gathered their belongings, the father carefully handling the boy's oxygen equipment while the mother helped him put on a jacket. As they moved down the aisle, the boy's eyes met Elijah's lingering on the similar oxygen tube. Recognition flickered across the mother's face as she glanced between Elijah and her son. "You're Elijah Reynolds, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Elijah nodded. "My son Gabriel has pulmonary arterial hypertension," she explained. "Before your case flying was difficult for us." Her eyes conveyed what words couldn't fully express: the suspicious looks, the unnecessary challenges, the subtle and not so subtle discrimination they had faced. "It's better now." Gabriel piped up, his voice small but clear. "They don't make me feel weird anymore. The Foundation sent us your guide about flying with oxygen," the mother continued. "It made all the difference knowing exactly what documentation to have and what our rights are." "I'm glad it helped," Elijah replied, genuinely moved. The father extended his hand. "Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to just accept a settlement and move on. What you and your family did, it matters." As they parted ways in the terminal, Elijah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The abstract impact of their legal victory and advocacy work had manifested in this concrete reality: a child able to travel with dignity, a family spared the trauma he had experienced. Later that evening, at dinner with his parents who had flown in separately for the conference, Elijah shared the encounter. "There was this kid on the flight, Gabriel. He had an oxygen concentrator too," he explained. "His parents recognized me. They said our Foundation's travel guide helped them." Monica squeezed his hand. "That's what this has all been about, right? Not just winning a case, but creating real change." Terence nodded thoughtfully. "When we started this journey, we were focused on justice for what happened to you. But it's grown into something so much more. The Reynolds Protocol isn't just a set of rules," Monica added. "It's becoming a standard for how people with medical needs should be treated with dignity, respect, and as a matter of right, not privilege." Elijah considered this. "I've been thinking about my medical school application essay. I want to write about how sometimes it takes a crisis to create change. How what happened to me was terrible, but the outcome has helped so many people. From trauma to purpose," Terence observed. "That's a powerful journey. I don't know if I would have found my calling without going through what happened," Elijah admitted. "Is that strange to be almost grateful for something so awful because of where it led?" "Not strange at all," Monica assured him. "That's how meaningful change often works. Someone experiences an injustice and decides that's the line, that's where transformation has to begin." As their conversation continued, Elijah felt a deep sense of alignment between his past trauma and future purpose. His path to medical school and eventually pulmonology practice had been shaped by what happened on that flight, but not defined by it. He had transformed from victim to advocate to future healer. The Reynolds Foundation had expanded its work beyond airline travel to address medical discrimination in all transportation contexts. The Breathe Free program now provided support to hundreds of young people with respiratory conditions, ensuring they had both the medical equipment they needed and knowledge of their rights. Most significantly, the Foundation's advocacy had contributed to congressional passage of the Medical Accommodation Rights Act, which strengthened protections for all travelers with medical needs and established substantial penalties for discriminatory treatment. Victoria Mercer, after serving her community service sentence, had continued speaking about the dangers of institutional discrimination. Her perspective as someone who had participated in the system made her a uniquely effective voice for change. She never sought forgiveness from the Reynolds family, understanding that some bridges cannot be fully rebuilt, but had dedicated herself to preventing others from making the same devastating choices. As their dinner concluded, Elijah prepared mentally for his presentation the following day. He would be speaking to medical professionals about the intersection of clinical care and patient rights, drawing from his unique perspective as both a patient and a future doctor. "I never thought I'd say this," Elijah reflected as they left the restaurant. "But in a way, what happened gave me a voice and a platform I might never have had otherwise." "You've used that platform wisely," Monica told him proudly. Many people experience discrimination. Few transform it into institutional change. The next morning, standing before a packed conference room of medical professionals, Elijah began his presentation with the story that had changed not only his life, but the lives of countless others who simply needed to breathe freely while traveling. 2 years ago, a flight attendant decided I didn't deserve oxygen. He began his voice steady and clear. Today, because of that moment and what followed, thousands of passengers with medical needs travel with greater safety and dignity. This is the story of how one act of discrimination led to a movement for equality that continues to grow. As he spoke, Elijah embodied the transformation his family had fought for, from a terrified teenager struggling to breathe to a confident young man helping others navigate similar challenges. The journey hadn't been easy, but its impact extended far beyond what any of them could have imagined when they decided to fight not just for justice, but for fundamental change. This powerful story teaches us that discrimination can arise anywhere, even in situations where professional standards should prevail. The Reynolds family's experience highlights how racial bias can manifest as life-threatening medical discrimination when left unchecked. Yet it also demonstrates the importance of documenting injustice, standing firm in the face of discrimination, and leveraging both personal courage and legal frameworks to create lasting change. The bystanders who recorded evidence and offered assistance show us that allies matter tremendously in moments of crisis. Their willingness to speak up transformed a private trauma into a catalyst for public reform. Most importantly, the story reveals that true justice extends beyond individual accountability to address the foundations that enabled discrimination in the first place. Elijah's journey reminds us that healing from discrimination is complex but possible, especially when trauma becomes a source of purpose. By channeling their experience into advocacy, the Reynolds family transformed victimhood into empowerment, creating protections that will benefit countless others facing similar situations. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination, like what happened to Elijah? Has this story changed how you'll respond if you see someone being treated unfairly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful accounts of justice prevailing. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Reynolds family's remarkable story of courage and transformation. Together, we can all work toward a world where everyone can breathe freely. If you found this story inspiring, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Your engagement helps us share more powerful stories of justice and transformation. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might be moved by Elijah's journey. Remember, Change begins when ordinary people decide to take extraordinary stands. Drop a comment below, telling us how this story impacted you, and join our community fighting for dignity and equality for